You know, when you hear the word propaganda, you probably think of lies, maybe some old wartime posters. But what if it's something way more scientific, a structured method for shaping the very fabric of society, an invisible force for what its creator called the engineering of consent? So how did this powerful idea even come to be, and how is it still shaping our world today? Let's get into it.
Wow, that is a pretty startling statement, isn't it? And it was written almost a century ago by a guy named Edward Bernays. He wasn't just suggesting this manipulation was possible, he was flat out arguing it was necessary for a modern democracy to work. This single idea would go on to shape politics, business, and our culture in ways we often don't even see.
And that's the big question, right? Who are these people Bernays is talking about? The ones who pull the wires which control the public mind. And what are their tricks? To figure that out, we've got to look at the man who literally wrote the book on modern propaganda.
Okay, so before we meet the architect himself, we need to understand his blueprint. To really get a handle on modern propaganda, we have to travel back to the world that created it, a world that was grappling with a totally new problem, the masses. So you got to put yourself in the early 1900s. Thinkers like Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays looked out at these booming cities and the new mass media, and they saw chaos. They truly believed the public was fundamentally irrational, driven by instinct, and just not equipped to make good decisions. Their goal wasn't necessarily to lie, but to bring some kind of order to that chaos. The only problem? The main tool they had for the job had a serious image problem.
And you can see on this timeline, the word itself went on this wild journey. It started out as this noble religious term for spreading the faith, but then it got weaponized in World War I. And afterwards, when people found out how their own governments had been manipulating them to fuel the war, well, propaganda became toxic. It turned into a dirty word, basically meaning lies and betrayal.
And right into that mess steps Bernays with his solution. He argued that society is, and let's be honest, he thought it should be, guided by a small, smart elite. An invisible government of experts who actually get how the public thinks and can steer it toward what's best for everyone. All right, so it's time to meet the man behind the curtain, Edward Bernays. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew, believe it or not, and he is the undisputed architect of modern public relations. And he wasn't just talking about theories, he was a master at putting them into practice. Now, Bernays was smart. He knew calling himself a propagandist was a complete non-starter. So he did what he did best. He rebranded. He came up with this term, Public Relations Counsel. It made him sound less like a puppet master and more like a professional advisor, like a lawyer or a doctor. He was turning a dark art into a respectable, almost scientific profession.
And this, right here, is his central idea, the engineering of consent. It was totally revolutionary. This wasn't about just yelling slogans at people. No, this was about using the new sciences, psychology, sociology, to understand what people deeply desire and fear, and then using that knowledge to systematically shape how they think and what they do.
So how did this whole engineering of consent thing actually work in the real world? Well, some of Bernays' most famous campaigns are they're brilliant and maybe a little devious illustrations of his methods in action. Okay, take bacon. His client wanted to sell more bacon. A normal advertiser would just make an ad that says, "Eat more bacon." But Bernays, he did something incredible. He asked, who are the authority figures? Doctors. So he got thousands of doctors to agree that a hearty breakfast was better than a light one. Then, newspapers everywhere reported this news. And just like that, bacon and eggs became the classic American breakfast. He didn't just sell the bacon. He sold the entire meal that needed the bacon. And he pulled this kind of thing off again and again. To save the velvet industry, he made sure all the big Paris fashion houses were using it, which created a trend that just naturally trickled down. He didn't sell pianos. He worked with interior designers to make the idea of a music room a popular thing. And what do you need for a music room? A piano, of course. And here it is, in his own words, his secret sauce. This quote just nails his strategy. Don't push a product. Change the world around it. Create a new circumstance or change an old habit so that people just naturally start to want your product, almost as if it was their own idea. You have to admit it's pretty ingenious, but it also makes you ask a really tough question. When a tiny group of people has the power to engineer our consent, who are they really working for? Who's actually benefiting from this smoothly functioning society? And that leads us right here to the really serious part of this whole story. Because the exact same methods he used to sell bacon could also be used to sell wars and protect massive corporations. And that has a much more dangerous legacy. Just look at this table. It really lays bare the two sides of Bernays' work. You have the public goal, and then you have the hidden agenda. So Light's Golden Jubilee looked like a fun celebration of Thomas Edison. But really, it was a huge campaign for General Electric to fight against public ownership of power companies. Or, in Guatemala, decades later, he didn't just warn about communism, he created the public support for a CIA-backed coup, all to protect his client, the United Fruit Company.
And look, this is where it gets really dangerous. For decades, these very same techniques have been used to muddy the waters and stall action on huge issues. Corporate propaganda, using the Bernays playbook, successfully confused people about the dangers of smoking for years, and it's still being used to create doubt on big things like climate change.
Bernays laid out this whole vision of an invisible government way back in 1928. Now, think about our world today. We've got social media influencers, targeted ads, and these crazy complex algorithms, all of them designed to shape what we think and what we do. So here's the final question for you. Has anything really changed? Or have the tools just gotten way more powerful? Are today's invisible governors just the tech platforms and data scientists who know exactly how to engineer our consent one click, one like, and one share at a time?